where an old house used to be. It used to be in my great great granddad's day, Cuthbert Schofield, used to live nearby. There used to be, you can just remember when he was a young boy, there used to be an old lady, everybody used to call her a bit of a sorcerer, and she called Mary Ann. And at the side of this river, she had a little house. Today, only an handful of older properties survive from the distant past. Probably, of these, the most well known is the building up Bradley Road known as Bradley Grange. This is probably the oldest dwelling in the village, dating from around 1550. When I was young, the Grange's inhabitants was the Woolgar family. Jack Woolgar came from Huddersfield as an actor and started in the early days of Coronation Street and many other TV dramas. He also made his name as the character Colne, the handyman in the 1970s ITV series Crossroad. Bradley Hall is probably the next oldest dwelling. Adjacent to Bradley Grange is Steep Lane. Where Steep Lane crosses the railway track by means of a level crossing stands Bradley Hall. Bradley Hall is older in part than the Grange. The earliest documentary reference of Bradley Hall dates from around 1547. However, both these two houses were covered in my episode 4 in times gone by. It's quite probable that back in the distant past, as you can see on this map here, Steep Lane crossed the River Calder by a ford near Bradley Hall Farm to what was then Kirklees Mill, of ancient origins then, and then it ran up Mill Lane in the Clifton Township onto Deep Lane into Town Gates. Higher up the hillside from Bradley Hall stands the remains of two old settlement sites in Bradley. One, called Cote, almost obliterated. Here, the main house was demolished for the golf course clubhouse when the course was set out here in 1977. Cote was first mentioned in 1565, and the name may date back to when large flocks of sheep grazed on the monk's land. Cote stands beside an old byway called Bent Lane, which led to Cockpit Lane, and it was in no doubt on this land belonging to a farm that the cockpit in the early days stood. It was in these cockpits that illegal cockfights took place between fighting birds, and the field name Cockpit Cote is now the only record of existence. Shepherd's Thorne, first mentioned in 1479, today exists as a single farmstead and was renovated during the 1980s. Little remains of the old settlement, except a stone barn attached to a dwelling house, which is of a similar date to the detached barn of Cote, late 17th or early 18th century. Although few original features survive, the house of Shepherd's Thorne appears to have been erected in the 18th century, or perhaps at the beginning of the next. By the late 19th century, the farmstead had been split into numerous units and was leased to a number of individuals. Old track down towards my great great grandad, Cuthbert Schofield, who was born around about 1830s. This would have been a little track to his house, which used to be in a lock house over there next to Kirklees Top Lock. His son were called Noble Schofield, and he lived in an house over were ICI, now it's Kenways Tipwa, and he was my great granddad. My granddad Frank Schofield, he fought in the First World War. So when he was a young lad, I can remember coming here to my great great granddad Cuthbert's house. Now in the vicinity of me, roughly where my great great granddad Cuthbert's house was. I'll continue my story. Colne Bridge House on Colne Bridge, erected over 200 years ago in 1776. Colne Bridge House is one of the few properties in the district with national historic connections. In former days it was for a period of the own of Thomas Atkinson, a significant figure in the Luddite era of textile history. Atkinson was a captain commandant in the Huddersfield Yeoman Cavalry, which fiercely opposed the Luddites and other insurgents, hell-bent on destruction of the new machines of the day, brought in to help improve the textile industry. There was a terrible tragedy at Colne Bridge Mills, then owned by Atkinson, which did little to raise his esteem in the community. A fire which engulfed the mill premises burnt to death 17 child labourers who had been locked in the mill building to work there overnight, unsupervised. Unfortunately, when the alarm was raised, the key could not be found, and all perished. They are buried in the churchyard at Kirkheaton, where a memorial stands. Interesting, and perhaps not surprisingly, no blame was attached to Thomas Atkinson himself or his mill managers. In the early 18th century, the nucleus of Bradley appears to have shifted, centering on Oak Lane, later called Oak Road, and Bradley Lane, later renamed Bradley Road. The only dated house in the village is found on the present Oak Road. An ornate stone over the doorway of number 35 carries the date and inscription JSB 1751. This probably refers to John and Susanna Brooke, and she may well be the same Susanna Brooke of Bradley, buried at Mirfield in 1756. At the time of the Luddite uprising in the district, it was still an inn, and it is recorded that a number of Luddite fraternity who marched with a body of insurrectionists intent on attacking Rawfield's Mill in 1812 met here before joining the assembled throng at the Dunstey local line. At what point in history number 35 Oak Road ceased to be a public house is uncertain, but in the early years of the 20th century it became the local post office kept by John Spence. Alongside the space between the three cottages and the end of a row of Victorian terrace houses, an old roadway which roughly followed the course of the present Elder Road and formed part of an ancient highway from Huddersfield to Leeds. It was here stood Oak's House and Oak's Farm, recorded in early documents, which alas were lost in the redevelopment of Bradley in the late 1940s. Oak's House is mentioned as early as 1277. Bell Cottage, 142 Bradley Road, unchanged for many years. This listed building was shamefully modernised in 1986 with the loss of much of its character. And it was then that the then owner's family worsened the situation by putting a modern bungalow adjacent. In 1829, it was under the occupation of Martha Lee at a yearly rent of 5 guineas and comprised of a cottage with stable, garden and an enclose of grassland called Peacroft. It had originally been 2 dwellings, both with only one upstairs and a single room downstairs. with a small scullery kitchen behind. However, the cottage to the right when facing had at one time been larger. In fact, it was possibly a later extension. At the rear of this property, a lean-to dairy survived, and interestingly, this appears to have been of an earlier date. When I was young, an elderly lady called Vera Wade occupied the house. Bradley Lodge was one of the old homesteads of the village and had a long history. There is mention of the lodge as early as 1592, which at that date was one of the 4 settlement sites of the Bradley district. By the year 1952, ownership of Bradley Lodge was accredited to Ellen Blair-Myers Hurst, from whom it was purchased by the Huddersfield Corporation. Bradley Lodge was briefly used as a school before it was demolished. Scholars attended the lodge towards the middle of the junior education before returning to the Sherwood Avenue School for their final year. Further down Bradley Road, beyond its junction with Leeds Road, stood an house known as The Beeches. This too dated from the late 18th or early 19th century. It stood on its own in the grounds at the corner of Low Quarry Road and Leeds Road, behind the present garage, was swept away to allow an extension of the garage premises. It was probably erected to serve as the mill owner's house for the nearby Holmes Mill, a double-fronted and built of local sandstone. It was in the garden of the Beeches that a tram car came to rest in the accident of 22nd of April 1905. At that time, the house was sometimes known as Cuthbert Bridge Villa.